Hey guys, just going through a quick tutorial on a little bit about the differences between Adobe and Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop, right? And also we're going to do a quick tutorial on how to convert this JPEG image, which you can see it's a pretty low-res JPEG, and how we can convert it into a high-res or even a vector image, right? I'm just going to quickly describe the difference between the two with a simple example. So if I create a new page in Photoshop, and let's say that I use a typical print letter size create, and let's do the same thing for Illustrator, right? And we are going to create a typical letter size, right? So in Illustrator, we're going to go to print and letter. In Illustrator, I am moving the page around by holding spacebar and clicking the left mouse button, and I'm zooming in and out holding Alt and mouse wheel. Alright, so pan and zoom. And in Photoshop now, I am zooming with holding Alt and the mouse button, and I'm panning with the same button, which is holding spacebar. Now, the primary difference between these two programs is one is resolution independent. Now, what exactly do we mean by resolution independent for Illustrator? Well, let's see what that is. So if I draw a circle in Photoshop, let's go to the circle here, and I'm going to draw a circle like that, all right? And I'm going to do the same for Illustrator, right? I'm going to have a circle. I'm going to fill it with black. So I'm going to choose the fill color to be black, and my stroke color to be nothing. And I'm going to use that to draw a circle so that I can get the fill color as black and the stroke, which is on the edge, as nothing, which is what this is saying. All right, good. So both programs give you a circle. So, you say, okay, that looks fine. But point to notice that Photoshop uses pixels to represent images, whereas Illustrator uses vectors. So if I should look at this circle, everything looks fine and dandy, but at some point you will see the independent pixels that make up the edge of this circle, right? And there's no way to go around that, because in Photoshop, how you create an image is by making it up with little squares, and these squares come together to give you an image. The blurriness of the image typically depends on how far you are away from the image. So think about how far you are from a billboard, but if you go right up to a billboard and look at it, you will notice it looks kind of blurry like this, right? Now, Illustrator, on the other hand, if I should zoom in, there will be no pixels, none whatsoever. And this is because Illustrator does not use pixels to generate its graphics. It uses what is called vectors. And whereas this might seem like a mind-blowing thing, like, okay, so why don't we all just use vectors for everything? Why are we using pixels where it has a limit to how far you can see it? If I look at the circle here, it looks pretty sharp, but if I go closer, it looks blurry. And it will always look blurry at a particular distance, because at the end of the day, they're all made up of sort of squares. Whereas with Illustrator, it doesn't matter how much you zoom in, you won't see any pixels. So that is the primary difference between the two. And this is why when persons do artwork, they would use Illustrator to create artwork that might have to be converted to different types of artwork. So for example, you might do a logo, because the logo is going to go on a billboard. It's also going to go on a business card, on a shirt. It's going to go to all of these deliverables, and you don't know what each of those deliverables will require resolution-wise. The billboard might say, hey, I need a picture that is 20,000 pixels by 10,000 pixels. But the t-shirt person might say, no, I just need a picture that's 200 pixels by 200. When you're working in Illustrator, you don't have to worry about pixels because it doesn't use pixels. So potentially you could get a graphic that can go on a billboard as well as go on a flyer, and you can get any resolution out of vector. So you might be saying, okay, so what's the point of Photoshop? Because why not just use Illustrator most of the time? So some, if not most, illustrators use Photoshop use Illustrator a great deal. However, there are things that Photoshop can do that Illustrator can't. These little guys that you see here called pixels, they are pretty nifty to do a few things that the vectors are unable to do. And we can cover that in another video, but just know that there are things that you can do with pixels that you can't do with vectors. And of course, the major thing that a vector can do is it's resolution independent. All right, so that takes care of the differences between two, or at least the major difference. Now let us look at our current mission, which is, okay, so here is the graphic that we have here, right? And this is an image. You can see that the image is, it's pretty blurry, it's pretty small. We can look at the specs of the image. If we look in file info here, we can see that the image has a dimension of 1280 by 720, which means it has 1280 pixels on the horizontal axis and 720 pixels on the vertical axis, right? Now, the amount of pixels it has in total, we can actually multiply 1280 by 720, and we'll see that it has pretty much just under 1 million pixels. So this would be basically a 0.9 megapixel picture. But anyway, currently what we want to do is we want to get this image sharper, right? So if I open this image in Photoshop, right? And what I'll do is just go to my Photoshop and go to open, and I'll go to my desktop and I'll open this image here. So notice when you open this image here, that's what it looks like. And you can immediately see that it is pixelated. But remember, pixelated only matters depending on how the viewer will experience this graphic. So for example, if I'm going to experience this graphic this small, which is like a phone screen, the resolution doesn't matter. This resolution is perfectly fine. If it's going to be an icon on the desktop, perfectly fine. However, if it's going to be maybe the cover of a magazine, highly likely people are going to view this image a bit closer. And it's really just about how close you're viewing the image that determines if it is acceptably blurry or not. Anyway, so if we want to increase the resolution of this, which means to inject more pixels into this image, well, to be honest, it's not really possible. I mean, there could be fancy algorithms that could introduce more pixels, but it's not a readily efficient way to get more resolution out of this image. As a matter of fact, because this is a logo, it would have been better that this logo would have been created in Illustrator first, and then you export it to the other purposes of using the logo, right? Because that way, Illustrator would be 100% sharp and it wouldn't have any pixels. Anyway, so we already know that we can't do this readily in Photoshop to make it sharper. So let's try Illustrator. So I'm going to go to File and Open, and I'm going to go to my desktop and open that. There we go. Now I've opened this in Illustrator. Now notice in Illustrator, it looks the same way, right? And you realize that Illustrator is able to open pixels but it can't manipulate them. And this is one of the downfalls of Illustrator. I mean, it's not made to manipulate pixels. Illustrator is made to manipulate vectors. So there's no way, there's no erase tool. You can't use the brush tool and blur the image, or all of these tools out here are meant for vectors, whereas for Photoshop, all these tools are meant for pixels. So for example, you could use maybe the eraser tool, and you could choose how you want to erase and start erasing some of the image like that, right? So yeah, and it will start to manipulate these pixels. Illustrator, no, you can't manipulate the pixels. There we go. Let me undo that. Madness. Okay. So what can we do with Illustrator? Well, a nifty trick is that you can convert image into vector. And it does this using some built-in algorithms to essentially trace the image and create a vector from the image. Now this might sound like magic, but it's not really magic, and most times it doesn't really work. In this case, however, because the image is relatively simple, meaning it's black and white, and it has these things that represent spaces in the text. Then it has a symbol here, and this symbol is pretty simple. So it's no problem for the algorithm in Illustrator to just trace and create a vector from this. So let's check this out. Now to do this, what we're going to do is click on the image, and when you go up top, you're going to go to image trace. You're going to click image trace. Now once you do that, you might see it changes to a weird kind of black and white color, right? And what you need to do is you need to go into the image trace options, and the image trace options are located up here. Image trace panel, there it is. Remember, I'm in Illustrator now, not Photoshop. And notice that it has converted it to vector using its built-in algorithm, and some parts may not be too hot, but most of it is okay. But notice you have lost some elements of the image. So what you can do is use the image tracing panel to use essentially different algorithms to detect, to interpret the JPEG, the raster image. So let me pick this one here, and it will do its calculation. And there we go. So with this algorithm, which is called autocolor, this is what it got, and this is pretty cool. It got the detail here, it's a little weird and stuff there. You can try to get it to interpret more colors. There we go. And it will try to get a bit more definition. Notice this is gray, this is white. But that's usually asking for trouble. Usually somewhere around there usually works, so that it simplifies the image. Now, for those of you who are a bit advanced in Illustrator, some people will do this, and then they will go in and use the direct selection tool to now manually edit these vectors. Before you can now start manually editing these vectors, you need to do what's called expand. So at the top here, you click expand, and that will turn everything into vectors. So now you're able to use the direct selection tool, and I can click on this here, and I can change that there. First I need to delete that, and there we go. And I can move this around, I can edit K and stuff like that. I'm not going to do that yet. What I'm going to do is, firstly, I'm going to delete the black, so that leaves me with just the logo here. I'm going to move this outside so you can see it a bit better. Next, I'm gonna delete using the direct selection tool. I'm gonna delete these and delete that and delete the black here and here and here and here and there. All right, good. Now that it's vector, I can now recolor this if I want. So let's say I wanted to change the text to a different color. Well, the first thing I would do is use my direct selection tool. I would select the red and I will cut it. And then I'm going to just paste it, but I'm going to paste it in place. And I'll tell you why I do this in a second. Then I'm going to do the music note. I'm going to cut it. Cut is Control X. Or I could just go to cut here. And I'm going to paste it in place. And notice now that these are independent objects. So this is great. So now this is an independent object. So I can move around. And what I can do now is I can just change the fill color to another color, maybe like orange. There we go. And I can also change this color to maybe like a blue. There we go. All right, so if I put this here, that's what I get there. All right, and you can do a bunch of other stuff to this, but now it is a vector image, and I can go and save this file. I'll save it to my desktop, and I'll save this as logo vector. And notice it's going to save as a Illustrator file, which is okay. All right, now let's say I wanted to now get this into Photoshop, because Photoshop has some pretty cool effects that you might want to use in Photoshop, but the original logo wasn't that flexible. For example, it has a black background and it's pixelated and so forth. So now what you can do is I can export this from Illustrator as a preferably a PNG, because the PNG will save the image without a background, right? So I'm gonna save the artboard as a PNG, and I'll call it the same vector PNG. Save that there, and now I get to choose my resolution. I'm gonna just leave it at 600. Okay. All right, so now in Photoshop, I can open this image and notice it comes in Photoshop, very nice. And I mean, you can see that the quality is much better. And yes, you still will have pixels, you always will have pixels, but because the source of the logo is in Illustrator, if I wanted this image to be bigger and less pixelated, then all I would do in Illustrator is to make this bigger like that, like twice the size, which it's not affected because it's vector. If I try to do that in Photoshop, making this twice the size, it would not get any sharper. It would be even more blurry, as you can see, right? So that doesn't work out in Photoshop. So when I make this twice the size, I will need to adjust my artboard using my artboard tool, to make it bigger, because the artboard is what gets exported. And I could now export this and call it vector large bracket, and save that as a PNG. Save the artboard as a PNG and save. Now if I open this image here, so this is a much larger image, right? Much larger. It still is made up of pixels. If you zoom far enough, you will see the pixels, but let's compare. I mean, if you compare this, and I'll put it up here, but if I put it here, you see that this is definitely bigger than the original logo, right? But with that new one, that large one that I just did, if I paste it here, you can see that the previous logo was pretty small. There it is. It was pretty small, meaning, look, by the time I zoom here, you can see that this is blurry, more blurry than this. At this distance, this is not blurry. So you can basically export your logo at any size because the source of it is now in Illustrator. And all you have to do in Illustrator is just make it bigger, and that's how you get a less pixelated image. Okay, so that's the tutorial here today. So good luck with your digital editing.